Helena Mangan, Head of Work and Family, Social Security.
And thank you very much for making time to come to the hearing today. We have just under an hour now, so we're aiming to finish at 2 because SLC will be at the doors trying to get in. And we do have quite a lot of questions, so we may need to follow up in writing afterwards. So I apologise in advance if we're quite pacey, and if you could assist with that by keeping the answers as succinct as possible.
Do my best.
Yeah, you're usually pretty good at that. Okay, Minister, I'm going to open by referring to the letter that you responded to us on the 24th of March. We'd made some requests for information and around the outcomes of the ministerial actions, which were detailed in the family-friendly post-implementation review, which I believe was instigated by your predecessor and then completed by yourself.
Right.
In that letter, you stated that the overall effort between government and the business and advice sectors is working well. Could you elaborate on this, please, including what evidence that you have?
I think the evidence that I have is based on the general take-up of the parental grant and parental allowance compared to the number of births. We know that the take-up is, and I've got the figures somewhere, but perhaps what we'll do is send those to you in writing if you haven't already got those. So there's only very, very few people that can't claim either. The department itself also has data directly from the maternity unit when we have babies born. And if then the department observes that a claim for parental allowance or parental grant hasn't been made, then the department will follow that up. So in terms of the take-up, I think of at least the allowances and the grants, I think we've got data around that. Where we don't have data and evidence, and I think the legislation doesn't really exist or enable us to, is around businesses complying with the need to give people their family-friendly rights. So that's one area where we do have less data. I know that we've also discussed the need for better communication. I'm pleased to say that I now have a draft of a leaflet that will that the government has done, which will be given at neonatal appointments, which outlines both the need for parents to know their rights and the relevant links there, as well as kind of a step-by-step checklist of things that parents will need to do as they have their baby, and then obviously need to book things like their parental leave. So I think the addition of a leaflet will be helpful to new parents, and that checklist, I hope, as well, will help people know what their rights are and enable them to have a good conversation with their employer as well.
Okay, thank you. That sounds really good. And we have got some questions in a minute about communication generally. I'd like to follow up on, so I was going to ask you what isn't working well, and you have said communications and compliance around businesses. Can you just elaborate further on what isn't working well in that area?
Well, we don't, when it comes to compliance, what I think my point was is that the legislation doesn't provide for government to then collect data and enforce it in that way. The only way that we would know around whether people have concerns around compliance with their employer is if they have taken a claim to tribunal, because that's the right of recourse that people have under the legislation. So if we saw a big influx of tribunal claims, then that would give me a cause for concern. Again, we've discussed around, whether people feel comfortable or not going to tribunal. I'm incredibly keen, actually, to see the results of your survey that's being done, and I think that the survey that you've sent out, and I shared myself actually on my own social media,
Thank you.
Will give us some really good evidence and some baseline information as well. So I welcome the work that you're doing in that respect.
Thank you, and that is really helpful. And of course, our aim is always to be constructive to the work that you're doing. So you said actually the problem is that there isn't an understanding of whether there is a problem with compliance because government can't collect data. And you've mentioned the tribunal process might be the only way, but is there anything short of the tribunal process that either exists at the moment or that could exist, that could be put in place to have a better understanding?
So I think that's where you would perhaps get some data and information from JACS around both employers and employees that have either gone to JACS for information and advice. There may, of course, be cases that JACS have dealt with that didn't get to tribunal because they've managed to do conciliation around that. So JACS would be well placed to discuss with you around the queries that are coming to them. They will also be well placed to tell the panel about the organisations that are taking up their offer of training as well. So JACS offer both online and in-person training. Again, I think the take-up of such training, the organisations that take that up, that's a good indicator about as well where there are better practices or where we've got employers that are wanting to be best practice employers.
Okay, we will be speaking to JACS, so I think we could put those questions to JACS. One more before I hand over to Deputy Stevenson. In terms of the intended objectives of this legislation, how do you measure whether it's achieving those?
That's a good question, actually, because of course the intended objectives were to enable people to take the time off if they wished with their new babies, and with regard to measure, as I said, we can from a departmental process know who's claiming allowances and the benefits. So I'm confident that we don't have people underclaiming where they are eligible. Whether or not it is then enabling people to take the time off that they want to be able to take off with their children, I think that's where we currently lack some evidential data. Again, that's one of the reasons why I'm quite keen to see the outcome of your public survey to see what we can glean from that, which is why I think that this scrutiny review is incredibly useful.
So is it fair to say you'd be open to considering ways that data and that information could be gathered in order to assess the effectiveness of the legislation?
I'd always be open to looking at how that can be gathered, and we know who the people are in this circumstance because we know who's had a baby or who's adopted. So there is an opportunity there to gather data and information.
We have got some questions on data collection a bit later, so we'll come back to that, and I'll hand over to Deputy Stevenson now.
I just wonder if I could follow up quickly on, you did say you had some figures at the beginning, but they might be better being sent. Do you have figures that show, are people using their full allowances, so payment allowances, or because that is somewhere you can drill into that data a little bit. You can't see beyond the allowances, but is you able to share any insight, or is that something that would need to come in writing as well after?
The full allowances, I'm looking at Helena because she's got the figures in front of her.
So we look at by quarter, don't we? And
Yes.
see.
And I also had a conversation with officers just yesterday, actually, when we were preparing for this hearing around whether we had any data from HRP credits and things like that. That is more difficult to get because we don't know the individual circumstances of the people getting the credits. It is more difficult because some people may not be claiming credits for various reasons. We had a discussion around, that component of paid leave and unpaid leave. So that data around who's taking how much time and how much time unpaid as opposed to paid currently doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But I think the question is about parental allowance and whether people are taking their full
Their
32
full amount.
weeks. I think that's something we can give you. I don't think
Can I
we have
just
it.
clarify, that 32 weeks of payments, people can only claim that if they're not working, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's 70.
170 babies were born.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Keep in touch hours.
Oh yes, there's 10. It's 10 days, isn't it?
which I think it's now 70 hours.
Yeah.
But so there are. It's obviously counterproductive actually to kind of keep you kind of completely outside the workforce. But so that's part of your is the benefit allows for a small number of days for you to attend a training course or like an annual review process or something which is important for your kind of when you come back.
But ultimately, your data that shows people claiming that does reliably show that people aren't working during that time because they have to not be working to claim.
We don't.
Is that
necessarily-
right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the minister's point about HRB and all that. So different employers will have different contractual rights with their employees, and some of those will have very generous maternity parental leave payments. So they're paying people during the time when they're not. So the fact that somebody's claiming a parental allowance and receiving a payment in their wages, which we see on our Social Security, that doesn't mean to say they're breaking the law in any way, just being paid for their period of the parental leave, yeah? So we don't know that. What we can do is we can give you the figures, but I don't think we have them today, do we?
How many people who claim it we do, but it's the
But no,
period of
how
time.
many weeks do they claim for?
We haven't got that today.
No, we haven't got that today. But we
I
can
think it'd
get
be
that.
something
That we
useful
can
to
get
show
for
if
you.
people are using that full amount for those who say, obviously, it's great to be paid in that period for lots of people, but some of the evidence we've heard so far is around that it's nowhere near enough to mean that it would cover their outgoings and their mortgage and things like that.
Sure.
So it may be that some people can't afford to even take, even with that payment, that much. I think it would be useful data if we could have access to it, please.
Yeah, so the only, the only time when somebody is, there's a very specific rule around it, is the first 6 weeks post-birth, which the mother must take as leave, and because 6 weeks is paid leave, in effect that is her 6 weeks paid leave, yeah? But the father's got up to 6 weeks paid, well, they're in a modelling up to paid leave as well, yeah.
Thank you.
Could I just ask a point of clarification? Are you saying that there are employers who pay longer than 6 weeks for maternity pay?
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
do you have a view as to how long that pay continues for? Does it vary between employer to a great degree that one employee might be getting 3 months, another might be getting 6, another might be getting 9? And which sectors does that happen?
It will absolutely vary just like that, and I think it will vary equally depending on which sector you are you're working in. I read some of the outcomes from your hearings yesterday, and I think you've already heard that people in like lower paid jobs, I think, and less likely to have that affordability of the paid leave. Small businesses are likely to have less flexibility about what they can do than larger employers, for example. So, but that's data. What we don't have is data around all of the different terms and conditions that different employers offer. Possibly trade unions might have some data or some information from what they've managed to negotiate for their members. But aside from information about public employees, the government wouldn't have data around specific terms and conditions sets within different employers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so back to the questions that we referred to, or I think you told us about JACS and the work that they do. So they're tasked and funded to provide advice to employers and employees on all aspects of employment and employment relations law on behalf of government. So that will include these family-friendly parts of the law as well. Can you advise us how the effectiveness of this service is assessed, please?
Obviously, JACS is an independent body. There is a board that is responsible for ensuring that JACS is doing the work that it is doing. They also supply their annual report as well. Because of the legislation around JACS, my role as a minister is, I suppose, quite finite, because I have to acknowledge the independence and the purpose of that board as being responsible for ensuring that the organisation is doing what it should be doing and needs to be doing. I do have regular communication with JACS, as do my officers, around what they are doing in particular around what training they're offering. I know in relation to family friendly, they do have a specific leaflet around family friendly legislation, but it wouldn't be me that collects the feedback on how effective or how well understood that leaflet is. That would be JACS itself, and then the role of the board to ensure that JACS is fulfilling its purposes and its obligations.
Thank you. And that board, does it have anyone from government who sits on it, or who maybe attends board meetings in like a watching capacity? Watching is the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Oversight.
Oversight capacity.
JACS is an independent body, so much the same as the Comptroller and Auditor General's board wouldn't have a government representative on it to maintain that independence. That's also the case for JACS.
Okay, thank you. During our last quarterly hearing of the Health and Social Security panel, you mentioned ongoing work with JACS to improve their communication methods, particularly their website. And I think it was cited as an area for improvement for them in their own annual report for last year as well. Can you update us on how those conversations are going, please?
We are in ongoing dialogue with JACS around those. I know that you've got JACS coming in tomorrow, obviously as they're responsible for their own website. I think the questions are going to be better directed at JACS than myself. But yes, officers are in ongoing dialogue, and then subsequent to that hearing did have further conversations around the website and improving accessibility. And the government's desire to see that website being accessible and also used as much as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. And then still on the theme of communication and getting messages out there, we have had a lot of evidence about difficulty in, or people feeling like they're confused or maybe not finding the information they want in a timely way, or even understanding the information perhaps. And I think JACS have got a video on the website which talks about the changes that were made in 2020, and there's a downloadable document in 2023. Have you seen those resources, and are you happy with them?
I will have seen those resources. I know that I would have fed back if I thought there could be any improvement, but at the end of the day I'm not a communications professional, and my understanding is that JACS work with communications professionals in order to update their information. So again, I think that's a conversation to have with JACS and its board, but also I would hope that JACS would be open to any of the feedback that you're getting through the review. I think that we can all learn from the evidence that Scrutiny gets in relation to these things, and we should all be looking at ways that we can improve things.
Because one of the pieces of evidence we heard yesterday from quite an experienced professional in the sector was actually that she'd watched the JACS video and was more confused than ever about what people were entitled to. I mean, would you recognise, Minister, that it's not a good look, is it? And if the professionals working in the sector can't even understand
I would
it.
hope that the professionals working in the sector have provided that feedback directly to JACS, because I think to wait for a public scrutiny hearing to give that feedback and not...
I think they didn't realise that so what happened is their understanding that they gained from that, they thought it was correct, and actually we had to kind of pause in the hearing and establish a shared understanding of it, because what they'd learned from that website was not actually correct. So
feedback in that case needs to be given directly to JACS so that those videos can be improved.
Minister, you do have, it's your department that has the relationship with JACS though as well, isn't it?
Yes.
On behalf of government.
Yes.
And I think some of your comments previously have said you will work with JACS. Do you recognise it is a partnership?
Absolutely, and my officers work with JACS on an ongoing basis. So it is always a partnership, and I'm always keen to work collaboratively with other organisations. So, and it's important that that's done in a constructive way as well. That's fair to that organisation, acknowledges the independence of that organisation. But also helps it to do its job in the best way possible.
Thank you. You also mentioned earlier some government communications that I think your team had been working on to put together, and think it may lead us on to a further question that comes up later, but can you just recap what you're working on? And did you say it's going to go into maternity packs?
Yes. So I felt quite strongly, and I think I mentioned to you in the last quarterly hearing, that we should have a paper leaflet that gets put into packs. So that's what communications are working on at the moment, and just in the process of finalisation. I've also spoken to both the head of communications and to digital services about the website, and the fact that I think that the accessibility of information on the website can be improved, although I know that there was a great deal of work that was done when the legislation actually changed around improving the area of the website around having a baby. Again, it'll be interesting to see the feedback that you get around whether that work achieved what it was set out to do, and whether it is, still as accessible as we'd want it to be. I don't think always people are looking out for websites. That's why I'm so pleased that the proposed leaflet that's in development, has a checklist in it of things that people need to be aware of and then act upon, because I think that's incredibly important. I think also one of the reasons why people shouldn't be slipping through is because the activation of the application for parental benefits is made at appointments with the midwives. So hopefully that process is streamlined through that and I think actually it's a good example of collaborative work across government departments as well.
Just going back to the independence of JACS, and you have said you have that relationship, which sounds constructive. That's good. In terms of the funding that goes to JACS, does that come from your department?
It does come via my department, yes.
Okay, and what kind of accountability is there attached to that funding, and KPIs and things like that?
So because JACS is an independent entity and established via legislation, it's not for the Minister or the Assembly to set KPIs. It is the role of the board to set those KPIs for JACS. So the legislation in itself kind of ensures the independence of that organisation.
So JACS are accountable to the board?
JACS will be accountable to the board.
And who's the board accountable to?
And the board reports to the States Assembly via and I present that as an R on an annual basis with the JACS annual report.
Does the money I presume isn't in the legislation, so does the money come with any KPIs or requirements, like grant agreement?
I think that's where because the legislation requires the Assembly to leave JACS to be an independent entity, it then is quite difficult then for a minister to set KPIs. It's very similar actually to when I was chair of PAC, for example, and had a relationship with the Comptroller and Auditor General, and at the end of the day the Comptroller and Auditor General reported to their board. And again, so it's that similar kind of setup. So I think if we wanted more, or the ability for a minister to set KPIs for JACS, then we'd need to relook at that legislation. And again, if the Assembly didn't want JACS to be an independent entity, which it currently is, then it would be for the Assembly to look at ways of whether or not JACS should be so independent. But it would be interesting to hear JAC's reflections on that, but I don't think that that's specifically related to family-friendly legislation, so perhaps that's something.
I mean, just reflecting on the leaflet that you were referring to, that seems to be something that is under the remit of JACS in terms of communicating, and obviously you've had to do it within your department, so that it's clear that there's a problem there. What do you see to be the solutions to that?
I think it's also my department's role to ensure that there is communication out there. The role of JACS is a conciliatory service to ensure that people are, both employers and employees have a place to go to that's fully independent and that can advise on legislation. This communication is more than the employment legislation. It's about the whole journey that somebody might have becoming a new parent, which falls outside the remit of Jack. So I don't think that me producing this leaflet is a reflection that something's not working at Jack's. I think that this is something that should and must be additional to the work of the Jersey Advisory and Conciliatory Service. It is an advisory and conciliatory service around employment legislation and employment rights.
Can I just follow up? Do you think it's acceptable that somebody who, or an organisation that is focused around that family-friendly legislation, that the communications on their website are out of date?
I wouldn't think it's acceptable for the communication to be out of date. That's something that needs to be brought up with the board itself. That's
Who would bring that up?
I would hope that whoever noticed that the information was out of date has sent that information directly to Jack's. It's not my role to check on Jack's website and the up-to-date nature of the website. If I did that, I think that would be probably a misuse of ministerial time.
But it's more than that, isn't it? It's about sort of the oversight that you say that you have of Jack's. It's just that you made a comment about talking to them about some of their communications. I think it was in a hearing in June, and we wondered whether anything had happened on that basis since then.
There's been some initial conversations that have happened due to unavoidable circumstances. A planned meeting was unable to take place.
And what will happen then?
We will recommence that discussion with Jack's when we're able to have that meeting.
Okay.
If you could keep us updated,
I will do,
we'd be
yes.
grateful. Thank you. Do you want to go to the...
Yeah, that's okay. Minister, you stated that midwives are a key communication point for family-friendly benefits. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you ensure the consistency and the accuracy in the information provided at that stage?
I know that our department had initially worked with the hospital and the midwifery department. I know that ongoing conversations will be had.
Regular meetings.
Yeah. Do you want to speak more to that, Helena?
We do. The midwives are very engaged with our team and working to help. We're supporting the same groups. So they will initiate the application process for parental benefits. And then we also later on check that every baby born in that period has accessed appropriately the benefits as well. Mm-hmm. But the midwives, we have regular meetings with midwives.
If you see that someone hasn't accessed, what do you do? Do you get in touch with them?
We can reach out. It's a safety net. So checking.
That's encouraging.
Yes.
it is,
Yeah, so that is done every quarter and checking in and following through that baby's journey.
Okay, thank you. And do you know if anyone is working with FNHC from government to support communication to new parents, so moving from the midwives over through to the health visitors and other professionals?
That's where we're using the leaflet.
Yes.
This will be the role of the leaflet to be able to promote the benefits and just those checklists that new parents, just make sure they've covered everything.
Do you think that health professionals need any more support to understand the basis of the legislation so that they can apply that consistency, or do you think it's fairly straightforward?
I think it has been communicated, but we do offer, we will do workshops with different teams. We go out to different groups, whether that's in health or further afield stakeholders, and regularly do updates right across the whole benefit spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So what is your plan with FNHC to support them in terms of some of this rollout?
I'll find out specifically on FNHC as a group. I haven't got that information.
The role of FNHC, I think, is in terms of health visitors once the baby's been born. In reality, the midwife is the key professional kind of contact here, because, and I think I mentioned before, that the parental allowance must be taken in the first 6 weeks after the baby's been born, which means that in reality, the parents have communicated in almost all such situations. The parents have communicated with the department before the birth, and therefore the midwife holds the forms. You physically get the forms from the midwife.
Yes.
So in terms of benefits, the parental benefits, pretty much the contact has been made before the baby's birth in the very great majority of cases. But only has a tiny number each quarter which haven't had something before the baby's been born.
Also, we mustn't forget adoptive parents as well.
And they, yes.
So I know that the department's been working to improve the process in respect of that, and working closely with children's services on that. So it's really important that those parents aren't forgotten.
Okay, so could we expect to see some sort of programme that actually sort of makes sure that that consistency is being applied right the way across the contact points, which are not just midwives by the sounds of it, that there are other people as well? Yeah. Okay. In terms of your leaflet's lovely actually, and I think it's really nice. Are you intending producing that in any other languages at all?
I will ask, because I'm always very keen on ensuring that our output is as inclusive as possible. So,
Yeah. And obviously, I think we've heard through a number of scrutiny committees for people who have hearing and sight impairment as well. That would be good to see there.
I will say on that, I do chair the Disability Advisory Group, and we do have a meeting on Thursday, so I will take the leaflet to that group as well and see if we've got any feedback in relation to that.
The checklist is really good on the back.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think the inclusion of the QR code actually means that you've got direct access to the website, which would also give you access to automatic translation and larger vision report, things like that. So I think there's quite a lot of value in the QR code.
Yeah. Super.
And the aim is that goes to people in their first booking appointment in the pack that people are given, or do you know?
That's my understanding. I've literally had the draft in the last few days.
Yeah.
So.
You get a big folder, don't you, with leaflets?
Yeah.
Usually.
That's exactly what was going through my mind, you know, what you need to know, the services that are available. Sometimes, you know, people don't know what they don't know, and if you're just about to have a baby for the first time, or even actually your second or third child, things might have changed. I think people always welcome information. They welcome being connected to community organisations as well.
Yeah, but that's a really positive step, because obviously we've talked about the gaps, and having identified those, I do think that is really positive that you've been able to do that within your department, and that the midwives are that joint working is going well. That's really good to hear.
Because some of the feedback has been that as early in the journey as possible, because people sometimes even before they're pregnant are trying to make plans. Well, could they afford it? What's the implications? So, you know, waiting till the 28-week appointment when you get your paperwork is far too late. People have already made plans, so I think that's really positive.
Yeah. That was really just a question about the consistency, so that we're assured that there is a consistent approach. Could you tell us what guidance or career advice is provided by government for new parents who are re-entering the workplace? Do you provide that service?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to see if it would be within our back to work service if people are going back into work from not working.
We have our cohort of, so you don't have to work. So if you might be a mandatory job seeker, but if you have a child under 3, you're not required to work. But of course, we do have people that come back and want to engage sooner. We support them. And it is very much, it's a one-to-one meeting. It's with an employment advisor, working through what area they want to work in. Maybe there's some skills gaps, do some training, some interview skills, CV workshops, and just helping match them up to employers.
Okay.
Building up confidence. I think that's sometimes the gap, isn't it, when you've been out for a little while. It's just bridging that confidence gap to have adult conversations again.
Do you find a lot of people take it up?
We've got people that do come to us who choose to, and we do support those. And then we have those who are required to job seek by virtue of the age of the child and being in receipt of income support. And we work with them, but we work at their pace.
Mm-hmm. Do you give us any idea, any ballpark figures about the numbers that you deal with on an annual basis, perhaps?
We have say 100 people would come through as a new cohort at a time, but then it varies the year group. So the under 5s would be a new cohort, but as they move up through their different hours that they're required to work, they're already engaged with the service, so that it's just their requirement is increasing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. And so this career advice that is available, is there information about that in any of the leaflets that go out? And if not, would you consider putting it in
I
there?
think it is worth considering and thinking about it. Yes, so we talk about income support and the services that are available via the department. Just thinking through the conversation that we've had as well around the timing then about reminding people about that advice might well then be as their children approach school age. So there might be some work that we could do with sites around, I'm just thinking this through as we're having this conversation around information then that goes to parents as their children start school as well.
I think it's worth considering, like Deputy Stevenson said, as early as possible, because what we've heard from the pop-ups that we've done is that people make these decisions, like financial and career decisions, actually in advance even of becoming pregnant sometimes, and that having that service there, even whilst they are employed but planning to perhaps not be employed, I think it could be really beneficial, and if it's there and it's a good service, it might just be about informing people. So if you could consider maybe letting people know a bit earlier so they can access that.
There's the balance, isn't there, about reassuring them that that is there, not adding pressure, that they've got to think about that. But yes, you're absolutely, we'll look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. I think you did start to touch on this at the beginning, but beyond tribunal claims, are there any proactive mechanisms or plans to monitor compliance with family-friendly legislation, particularly around job protection and non-discrimination?
Like I said earlier, the legislation doesn't give me any kind of provision to make it incumbent on employers to provide me with information about that, how they're meeting that. So currently, the tool that I've got is any feedback that Jax puts in its reporting around what questions and what it's being asked, but also those tribunal claims. Like I said, one other further avenue that I could think of would be the trade unions who may well have supported people through potential disputes, or even just understanding what they are aware of for what they may have negotiated for their members in different workplaces.
We have written to, I think, most of the unions, some of whom are still yet to get back to us, I believe, so hopefully we'll hear from them.
Whether or not organisations such as the Chamber of Commerce and the IOD, who of course also have a role to play in ensuring that their paying members are getting the right information and information that's relevant to their sectors.
It'll be one of my next questions. Shall I jump into that
Yeah,
one?
you
So I
can
think
do,
we've probably covered most of those. So you have mentioned that in the past, Minister, that those organisations have a part to play. How do you encourage those organisations and support them with resources that they might need?
I would encourage those organisations through any conversations that I have and correspondence that I have with them. Obviously, we're now in a position where we've got at least a draft paper-based leaflet, and again, I'm happy to share information with those organisations as well. So, obviously, I would encourage the membership of those organisations to ensure that those organisations are doing what they think they should be doing in terms of providing support and advice to the relevant sectors as well.
Can they access this leaflet for their workplaces to have?
I'm quite happy to enable access to leaflets for workplaces as well. I think I've said before, I think that it is the role of government to ensure that people know their rights, but also that people know their responsibilities.
Okay.
As well. So I do think that there is a key role there for employer and employee organisations to ensure that their members have access to the right information too.
And thank you. And when you're talking to those organisations, what feedback have they given you on this law?
I think it's fair to say that there's mixed feedback. I know that you have had some submissions from such organisations.
Yes, we've written to them.
The business representatives will talk about the pressure that the family-friendly legislation puts on businesses. Obviously, the part of what the parental benefit was set up to do was also to help support businesses because they can deduct the value of the parental benefit from any paid leave. You know, we talk, and I know that it was discussed at your hearings yesterday around the length of the statutory paid component of leave and whether that's enough or not. I think if we were to ask the representative organisations of businesses and suggest that we should extend it, you get quite a different answer from them as you would do the family support organisations. So it's always that tension and balance, isn't it, around supporting our economy, but also supporting parents to make the right decisions for them and their child.
Do you think that we have the right balance at the moment with the legislation, or do we need to amend it?
I am concerned that people who may want to spend longer with their child currently feel that they can't do that. I myself was fortunate enough to spend an extended period of leave with my daughter, and you know I also promote the benefits of breastfeeding as well, and I know how important time with a baby is if you are breastfeeding that baby. But we need to balance that with what we can afford, and I would encourage actually the panel, if you are making recommendations around extending provisions, it would be incredibly helpful if you also made recommendations about how you think that could be achieved as well in striking that balance between both supporting the economy but also doing things that are affordable and how we might support that as well.
That's my next question is along those lines. So if we were to improve things for children and families with this legislation, how could government better support businesses to be able to deliver those aims for children and families?
I know that, you know, other jurisdictions have been mentioned in other hearings. I think it's important to note that those jurisdictions have different approach to taxation to what we have. So what might be possible in other jurisdictions may not be possible here due to our revenue streams. And I think we need to be alive to that as well.
What could be possible?
I think that's what we need to look at as to what's affordable within. Currently our parental benefits are funded via the Social Security Fund. So, you know, that actually might well be a question when we're looking at our actuarial review around what's affordable and sustainable for the fund in the longer term as well. I also think that the flexible working, and again I note from, you know, what you heard in your hearing yesterday, and I know anecdotally and through experience of other people that I know, it can be more difficult for some people in certain sectors to request flexible working than it can be in other sectors, and I think that we need to carry awareness of that. Some sectors can do more than others, and some sectors have more flexibility around what they can do. So I think in terms of supporting employers, I think it's about government having awareness of all of those complexities and ensuring that when we're looking at legislation, we consider that as well.
Yeah, we're very mindful of the need for that balance. Can we move to this one? Thank you.
You previously noted concerns about employers reducing more generous parental leave policies in response to some of these statutory changes. How are you monitoring the trend around that, and what protections have you got in place to discourage that kind of regression in the workplace?
I don't think it was me that expressed that. I think it was somebody else that asked me the question. And I said if that was the case, I would be concerned.
There was a comment from a respondent to the previous minister's survey. So that was
Yes.
So somebody mentioned that was their experience, yeah. But these are contractual rights, and as we discussed earlier, the contractual rights are entirely at the discretion of the employer. The point about the employment law is to create statutory minimum requirements that everybody must keep, and that's what the minister's role is. We obviously encourage people to go over and above that, but we don't have any control, nor would it be appropriate to do so, to have any control on contractual arrangements, yeah? Because if you wanted to control it, you'd up your statutory ones, wouldn't you?
Thank you.
I think also, I think employers now are more and more aware of the need to be family friendly, because we are in an incredibly competitive market for employees. So actually, and I think this came through as well through some of the submissions that you've had around actually if we want Jersey to be a competitive jurisdiction and then employers want to compete within that for talent, then they do recognise that actually being a family-friendly employer is incredibly important, because that's actually what younger generations of
Part of an
people are
attractive
looking
package.
for.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Regarding government's employment practices, do you know if it is correct that the children of employees are not permitted access to the office areas of the new government headquarters in Union Street under any circumstances?
I don't know that. That would be outside of my remit. That would be the remit of the State's Employment Board. So I would, but I'm
Personally,
Do you think
because
that
of building, it
aligns?
might be health and safety, I don't know.
Do you think that aligns with creating a family-friendly working environment, supporting flexible, inclusive working practices at the heart of government?
I would need to know what the circumstances are and what the reasons are. I can understand that there were very valid reasons why people might take their child into an office. And yeah, it would surprise me to learn that they weren't allowed to in any circumstances.
So one of the things we want to know is whether or not managers have considered how the policy will work in practice for new parents attending the Keep in Touch days who may have older children and no childcare in place.
I'm not a member of the State's Employment Board, so I couldn't answer that question.
Okay, but your view on it?
I absolutely agree that I could see that there would be a difficulty for parents with their keeping in touch days. You know, when I can recall taking my own daughter as a baby into my workplace at the time. I can see you nodding. Yeah. So I think we're all in a situation where we've probably all done it. So, but I've not heard of that policy, and I'm also not responsible for it.
Okay, so in terms of the legislation and the way government are adapting to the legislative framework, would there be anything that you might do as Minister to address those concerns that people have raised?
I am quite happy to have discussions with members of the State's Employment Board. I also understand that there are some areas of the workplace where it would be dangerous and very unadvisable to take children. So I don't think that such an approach could be a blanket approach. You know, there are some areas, I think, in the hospital and other areas where it would be completely inappropriate. But not being a member of the State's Employment Board, I couldn't say whether what you're saying about the policy is correct, and I don't have the advice that was given to them. So there might well be very good advice and reasons around fairness, but it's not my area.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. And just quickly on unions and the way they help to promote awareness among their members and bring up any issues. I think previously we talked about the the time that union reps get to do their work and whether they should have some protected time for this kind of thing as well. Are there any mechanisms that you're aware of or that you think could be used to help union volunteers outside of government employment who are trying to promote awareness of this legislation among their members?
Obviously, employers providing any kind of facilities time and opportunities for their representatives to go and do training that might be on offer. That might also include the attendance at things like regional or national conferences around diversity and inclusion as well. I think that being able to tap into both regional and national opportunities only strengthens both the knowledge but also their ability to help and advise, and for us actually as a jurisdiction to make sure that what we're doing is best practice and we learn from other places as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Minister, we've spoken about affordability, and you've said yourself that you feel that parents who want to be at home to care for their children aren't able to access that 52 weeks. In terms of plans to expand support to enable access to that, what might that look like?
Currently, we don't have plans around increasing access to that. I am always open to be informed by what comes out of this scrutiny review. But also, like I said, we need to be mindful of any changes around affordability and sustainability as well. And also be mindful of the effect on the economy. So, but also, I'm not just the only minister that can do things that help with regard to affordability. We know that housing, for example, is a huge kind of cost demand on families. I've spoken before to you about the plans for the minimum income standard, and my want to do some focused work there on, we know that child poverty is an issue, and I think that the approach needs to be multifaceted when it comes to supporting families. The support needs to be, right through that journey as well. So I think that's another important role that I play as a voice around the table of the Council of Ministers as well.
Thank you. And if you were minded to increase the support to families, would you be more likely to look at increasing the portion of leave that the employer pays at full pay, or are you more minded to increase the parental allowance, which is currently 32 weeks?
I think ultimately those types of decisions are decisions that would be made by the whole Assembly if there were to be any increase, and we need to kind of feel the mood of the Assembly as well.
You would bring that proposition though, would you not, Minister, as the Minister of this area? So what might that look like?
Within this term of office, my work plan is absolutely jam-packed full, and we also don't have any legislative drafting time available to make such plans. I'm keen to see the results of this review, so that then that could inform any future plans and future ministerial plans as well.
Can I just mention, Minister, though, that you have extended HRP, yeah?
Yes.
So that is a
Yes.
I haven't been
Yeah,
sat on my
great.
hands doing nothing in this area. I did extend HRP. I was very conscious that there were instances of parents having a second or third child that weren't able to access parental benefit because HRP credits were kind of pension-only credits. So extending those to also cover the parental benefit, I think, will be helpful to some of those families that are contemplating having another child.
I think that's a great example of
missed out.
scrutiny working well with
Yeah.
the Minister, because I recall us questioning you on that, and obviously you've seen that through, and that's a really good change for families.
So whilst I've been able to make only kind of what might be small changes, I think they are significant changes for those families, and hopefully the small changes we've been able to make are helpful.
When your work comes back on minimum income standards, do you envisage using any figures and data that it may have in it, or models, to look at policies like the payments that are paid to people on the parental allowance and saying, well, how does this compare?
That's how I would personally look at that, but I'd also look at what other levers government might have, because I think what we're likely to find is that there's a multiple kind of financial pressures. But
Can we also look at the timing? Is in reality, as Minister, you won't actually see the results?
yes,
Yeah.
so the timing of that will be that I think by the plans that we're looking at the moment, we're more likely to get the results during the PERDA period. I think it's still important to proceed with that piece of work, because I think it's really useful information for a future common strategic policy, and I think vital information that ministers should have in front of them as they're looking towards a new common strategic policy for the next Assembly.
Thank you. And yesterday, Minister, you mentioned poverty, and yesterday we had a hearing with Brighter Futures, and I think we were quite shocked at some of the feedback that we got about some of the situations that families are living in. What's your response to this rising economic inequality and how children are being impacted?
So, as Minister, what I do try and do is take time to visit organisations such as Brighter Futures, and I've actually gone down and done drop-in sessions with families down at Brighter Futures several times over the last few months, and intend to do the same during the rest of the year as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's important for me because it gives me insight into specific, almost like case studies and information around where families are specifically finding it hard.
So what
And
actions do you take following that?
what I do following that is, firstly, we look at what we can do for that specific family, and then, and I've spoken to you before about how I think that type of thing helps us identify where there's gaps so that we can then take quick action around guidelines if required, and things like that, and make processes better. So obviously if it's something around legislation, that's different and takes longer, but certainly what I do when I've had those conversations with families is take any issues that I think we can resolve quicker and take action. So obviously I don't want to talk about specific cases or circumstances right now, but I do want to give people confidence that when I get information and know that we can change things for the better, we try and do that as swiftly as possible. And as Helena and Sue both know, I am literally going through the income support guidelines page by page with officers to ensure that where updates can be made, they are.
Okay, and I'm sure those organisations will be pleased that they're being listened to and that you're taking those things under consideration. We're at time now. We do have a few questions left, which I think we will send in writing, so as not to rush them too much. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah. Okay, would you like to add anything before we close the hearing?
Not at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time to you and your officers. It was